I was lifting my fork at our family dinner when my husband slammed his hand on the table and announced he was filing for divorce, the crystal glass beside my plate rattling. Still, I didn't flinch, just slid the glass a little closer, listening to the faint clink echo through the room. As the silence stretched, I watched his mother lean forward, her perfume mixing with the smell of roast chicken, waiting for me to beg. While everyone stared, the same glass stayed cool in my hand, and I realized how much power I'd been holding without ever using it. The same steady weight told me this wasn't an attack. It was him assuming I had none. That's when I calmly spoke the truth that made his mother collapse, and the room finally understand who owned the table. Before we start, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. If you enjoy the story, please hit like, subscribe, and join our community. It really helps us grow. The first time my mother-in-law waved her hand at me and said, "Oh, Olivia just helps out with the numbers. Jason built this place." She didn't lower her voice at all. She said it like a fun fact, loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. It was a packed Friday night at Reed & Coer's Bistro. The air was thick with garlic, butter, and wine. Plates clattered behind the swinging kitchen doors, forks scraped against porcelain, and the low buzz of conversation rose and fell like waves. I stood at the host stand with a tablet pressed to my palm, updating reservations, juggling wait times, smiling until my cheeks ached. A couple stepped inside, shaking off the cold, eyes bright as they took everything in. "Wow," the woman said. "This place is beautiful." "Thank you," I began, meaning it. Her husband smiled at me and nodded toward the open kitchen, where Jason moved confidently between stations. "You two built something amazing," he said. For half a second, something warm lifted in my chest. Then Margaret appeared. Her perfume reached me before her voice, sharp, floral, expensive. She slid neatly between me and the couple, gripping Jason's arm like she was claiming him. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said, beaming. "My son had such a vision. Jason built all of this from the ground up." Jason smiled, easy and practiced. Margaret tilted her head toward me without looking. "And Olivia just helps out with the numbers," she added lightly. "She's very good at that." Helper. The word landed hard. I kept smiling, though it felt frozen. "Actually," I said carefully, "my inheritance funded the renovation, and I handle all the bookkeeping." Margaret laughed, not cruelly, worse. Amused. "Well, someone has to play with the spreadsheets," she said, waving her hand. "That's not the exciting part." The couple's smiles tightened. They nodded politely, then looked away, suddenly very interested in the wine rack. I felt heat creep up my neck, not from the kitchen, but from something quieter and sharper. Jason said nothing. Instead, he launched into a story about risk and sacrifice. "I went all in," he told them. "Everything I had. Sleepless nights, constant pressure. But when you believe in a dream—" He gestured around the room like a magician revealing a trick. I remembered the bank office, the hum of fluorescent lights, the weight of the cashier's check in my hand, the way the loan officer's tone shifted the moment I slid it across the desk. None of that made it into the story. The hostess bell rang. Another party arrived. I moved automatically, seating guests, reciting wait times, smiling until my face felt numb. By the time the rush slowed, my chest felt hollow. In the tiny back office, the air smelled like toner and old paper. The metal desk was cold under my fingertips. Jason followed me in, loosening his apron, still energized. "Can we talk for a second?" I asked quietly. He shut the door halfway. I chose my words carefully. "When your mom said I was just helping in front of customers, that hurt." Jason stepped closer and kissed my forehead. "You're too sensitive," he said. My stomach dropped. "No one cares who wrote what check," he added. "They care about the food, the vibe. You should just be happy to be part of my dream." Part of it, like a guest. "I wasn't trying to make it about money," I said, even though money was the only reason the doors had opened. He sighed, already done. "Don't overthink everything," he said, and turned toward the door. Tonight was a win. The door clicked shut. I sat down slowly. At my feet was a folder I'd brought earlier, edges worn soft. I pulled it onto my lap and opened it. Legal documents. Articles of organization. My name printed clearly at the top. Olivia Reed. I stared at it, waiting to feel solid. Proud. Instead, I felt invisible, like my name existed only on paper. Today I know that was the night I realized I wasn't seen as a partner. I was help. And once you hear it said out loud, you can't unhear it. Jason changed the banking passwords the same way he rearranged the pantry, quietly while I was busy, and then acted like it had always been that way. Our kitchen was warm from the oven, and the overhead light made the laminate counters shine. Ethan sat at the table in dinosaur pajamas, coloring so hard his green crayon squeaked. I had the power company website open on my laptop, the bill due tomorrow. A small red reminder that life kept moving no matter how tired I was. I typed the login like muscle memory. Enter. Then the password. Enter. Incorrect password. I frowned and tried again, slower, feeling my shoulders creep upward. "Huh," I muttered. "The password isn't working." Jason drifted in behind me, smelling like soap and the peppery cologne he'd started wearing to the restaurant. He leaned over my shoulder, close enough that his breath warmed my ear. "Oh," he said, too casual. "I had to update everything." "Update everything?" I kept my eyes on the screen, waiting for him to give me the new one. "New security requirements," he replied, as if the bank had personally called him. Then he added, gentle like a doctor delivering bad news. "And honestly, with your anxiety around money, it's better if I handle it from now on." My fingers froze above the keys. "My anxiety," I repeated, because I needed him to hear how ridiculous it sounded. He made a little shrugging noise. "You get stressed. You spiral. I did corporate accounting for 6 years, I said. My voice stayed low, but it shook anyway. Numbers calm me. I'm not spiraling. I'm paying the power bill. Jason chuckled, the kind that wasn't humor so much as dismissal. You overthink everything, Liv. Before I could respond, he reached forward and closed the laptop with one hand. The click felt like a door locking. He patted the lid twice, slow, patronizing, like he was calming a dog. I've got it, he said. Go sit down. Heat climbed my neck. I'm not a child, I whispered. He looked at me like I'd made it awkward. Why are you picking a fight? I'm trying to help you. Then let me see the statements, I said. Monthly. Just send me the PDFs. That's normal. Jason's eyes narrowed. So you don't trust me? That's not what I said. It is, he insisted, voice sharpening. You act like the only thing you brought into this marriage was a checkbook. The words landed in my chest and stayed there, heavy and embarrassing. I grabbed the dish towel off the counter just to have something in my hands. The cotton was damp, smelling faintly of bleach, and I twisted it like it could wring out my humiliation. Ethan looked up, crayon paused. Daddy's the boss, right? He asked, repeating something he'd heard too many times. Jason's mouth curved. Exactly, he said, satisfied. I swallowed, tasting metal. For a moment, I wanted to correct my son, to say, no, honey, grown-ups are partners. But the way Jason stood, relaxed, certain, made the words stick to my throat. Jason walked away, already tapping his phone, already done. I stood in the yellow kitchen light, listening to the dishwasher hum and Ethan's crayon resume its squeak, and I understood it wasn't about stress. It was about access. It was about me being kept outside the door to our own money. That night, after Ethan fell asleep and the hallway dimmed to TV glow, I went into my tiny home office and shut the door. Paper and cold coffee hung in the air. In the closet, I found the fireproof box and opened it with shaking hands. Beneath my father's will sat a worn folder labeled OR Holdings LLC, 51%. A sticky note in his handwriting said, make sure you understand what you own. I stared at it until my eyes burned, realizing I never had. The first time I saw Jason and Margaret huddled with a lawyer at table 6 while I rolled silverware in the back, something in me went still, like my body understood the insult before my brain could translate it. It was a slow Tuesday, the kind that smelled more like lemon cleaner than food. The coffee machine hissed and clicked, and the dining room lights were turned down low even though the sun outside was still bright. I sat at a corner table near the server station with a plastic bin of forks and knives, wrapping them in cloth napkins until my fingertips felt dry and papery. Nina came up beside me quietly, her ponytail still damp from mopping. "Olivia," she murmured, not meeting my eyes at first. "Jason and his parents are having a meeting." I kept rolling silverware like if I stopped, it would look like I cared too much. "About what?" She tipped her chin toward the front. "There's a guy in a suit at table 6. My hands paused mid-fold. Through the hallway opening, I could see table 6 clearly, the one near the window where Jason usually seated important people. Jason sat with his back partly to me, shoulders relaxed like he belonged there. Margaret leaned forward, bright lipstick and sharp gestures, her fingers chopping the air as she talked. Frank sat slightly aside, hands folded, eyes down. Across from them was a man I didn't recognize. Gray suit, neat hair, briefcase on the chair beside him. Papers were spread across the table like a little white mess. I watched for 2 seconds too long, and Jason's head turned. His eyes met mine, just for a beat. Then, with a movement so quick it felt rehearsed, he reached for a menu and placed it over a stack of documents, flattening it with his palm like he was smoothing a wrinkle. Margaret didn't even glance back. The man in the suit didn't look up at all. My stomach tightened the way it did before an argument, before I even spoke. I stood, pasted on my best host stand smile, and walked out like I belonged in every inch of that building. The tile felt cold through my shoes. I could hear my own footsteps in the quiet dining room, soft and too loud at the same time. "Hey," I said brightly, stopping beside the table. "Do you need anything? Water? Coffee?" Margaret turned her face toward me with the smile she saved for customers, wide, polished, and empty. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, voice syrupy. "We're just going over vendor contracts. Boring, grown-up stuff." I blinked. Vendor contracts were literally what I used to manage for a living. But she said it like I'd never read a full sentence without help. Jason didn't look at the papers. He looked at me, and his smile was tight. "Yeah," he added. "It's nothing you'd want to waste brain space on." Waste brain space. The lawyer finally lifted his eyes, and they slid over me the way people glanced at a coat rack, registering shape, not importance. He gave a small nod that wasn't really a greeting, then looked back down at the documents. My face stayed calm, but my skin prickled. "Okay," I said, still smiling. "Let me know if you need anything." Margaret waved a hand, dismissing me like a fly. "Go home and rest," she said. "You look tired." I walked back to the server station with my spine straight, but inside I felt smaller with every step. Nina was there, pretending to wipe down a clean counter. Her eyes flicked up, asking without words, "Did they let you in?" I shook my head once. After a while, their meeting broke up. Chairs scraped, the suit packed his briefcase. Jason laughed too loudly at something Margaret said, and then they disappeared into the office hallway. I kept rolling silverware until my wrists ached, telling myself there had to be an innocent explanation because the alternative made my chest hurt. Later, when I took out the trash from the office, I noticed a crumpled sticky note near the bin, half stuck to the liner. I smoothed it out on my thigh. A name was scribbled on it, something like H. Carter, and beneath it, in rushed handwriting, "Amend operating agreement." My mouth went dry. Amend. Operating agreement. Our LLC. I shoved the note into my pocket like it could burn through fabric. That night in bed, the room lit only by streetlight stripes across the ceiling, I asked Jason softly, "Are you changing anything with the business?" He exhaled like I'd ruined his sleep. "You're always catastrophizing," he muttered, rolling onto his side. "Maybe you should talk to someone about these trust issues." Then he went quiet, breathing deep and steady, like the conversation was already erased. I stared at the ceiling, sticky note folded tight in my fist under the blanket, and I heard my father's voice in my head, calm and firm. Don't sign what you don't understand. Today I know that was the moment my fear stopped being vague and started taking a shape. When Caroline called, instead of replying to my email, I knew something was wrong before I even answered. I was sitting in my home office, the smallest room in the house where the air always smelled faintly of paper and dust. Morning light cut through the blinds in thin stripes, landing on binders stacked against the wall and Ethan's crayon drawings taped crookedly above my desk. I had my laptop open, the original LLC documents pulled up in a tidy folder, my own name highlighted like proof I still belonged somewhere. I'd sent the email almost casually. Hey, any amendments filed I should know about? I expected a short reply. A nope, maybe a smiley face. Instead, my phone rang. Caroline's name lit up the screen and my stomach tightened before I even picked it up. Hi, I said, trying to sound normal. Olivia, she replied, calm but careful. Why are you asking that? The way she said it, slow, measured, made my throat dry. Lawyers didn't call unless there was context or concern. I just wanted to check, I said. Nothing's been filed, right? She didn't answer that immediately. Has anything unusual been happening at the restaurant? She asked instead. Anything at all? The knot in my stomach pulled tighter. I rolled my chair back slightly, the wheels catching on the rug. There was a meeting, I said. Jason and his parents. With a lawyer. I wasn't invited. Caroline went quiet just long enough for my pulse to thud in my ears. I kept talking, afraid that if I stopped, I'd lose my nerve. I told her about seeing papers spread out on the table, Jason covering them when he noticed me, about the sticky note that said, amend operating agreement, about Jason changing all the banking passwords so I wouldn't stress, about Margaret calling me help in front of customers, like it was a joke everyone understood but me. I didn't tell her my hands had been shaking every night. I didn't tell her I'd started triple-checking doors before bed. Caroline exhaled softly. Okay, she said. First things first. I structured OR Holdings to hold 51% ownership for a reason. Your inheritance funded the startup. Jason and his parents together hold the remaining 49. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I remember. He cannot legally change your ownership percentage without your signature, she continued. Not through an amendment, not through a side agreement, not through a backdated filing, not without you signing. Relief flickered, fast and fragile. So, nothing can happen? There was another pause, not long, but heavy. Have you signed anything recently? Caroline asked, without reading it closely. My chest tightened. Images flashed through my mind, Jason sliding papers across the table saying, just bank forms, routine stuff. I already looked it over. I've signed things, I admitted, trusting him. The silence on the line stretched this time. I imagined her leaning back in her chair, lips pressed together. Okay, she said finally. Then the next step is simple but important. We need copies of everything you've signed in the last year. Everything? I asked. Yes, she said gently. Loan documents, bank authorizations, anything related to the business. My fingers curled against the arm of the chair. What if something's already been filed? If it has, Caroline replied, we'll see it. Her voice sharpened slightly, professional steel under the calm. I'll request copies from the state and from the restaurant's accountant. Paper leaves trails. I swallowed. Do you think he's trying to do something? I think, she said carefully, there's a reason he wants control over passwords and paperwork all of a sudden. We talked a few more minutes. Next steps, timelines, what not to confront Jason about yet. When we hung up, the room felt quieter than before, like sound itself had pulled back. I sat there, phone resting on my desk, and looked around my office. At the binders I'd organized for years, at the bills neatly stacked, at Ethan's uneven letters spelling Mom in blue crayon. For the first time, the thought landed fully formed and terrifyingly clear. My marriage and my job might be about to become the same fight. I wasn't supposed to see the emails. Nina only printed them because the office printer jammed again, making that grinding, choking sound like it was swallowing paper whole. Jason was out front, leaning too close to the hostess, laughing a little too loudly, too busy enjoying himself to notice anything happening behind the scenes. It was a Thursday afternoon, the quiet stretch between lunch and dinner. The kitchen smelled sharp and sweet with chopped onions. Somewhere, a prep cook banged a pan harder than necessary. The office felt warmer than the rest of the restaurant, the air thick with toner and dust. Nina rushed in, eyes wide, clutching a stack of papers against her chest. Her hands were shaking. "Hey," she whispered like we were already in trouble. "The last print job got stuck with the invoices. I didn't know what to do." She held the papers out to me like they were fragile, like they might explode. I took them without thinking. The top page wasn't an invoice. It was an email. I saw the subject line first, bold and clean at the top of the page. Exit strategy. My name was in the first sentence. I felt the blood drain from my face so fast the room tilted. I had to grab the edge of the desk to steady myself, my fingers curling into the chipped laminate. I skimmed at first, not really reading, my brain still insisting there had to be some mistake. Then the words sank in, one by one, cruel and precise. Jason wrote that he was tired of carrying dead weight. He wrote that I had contributed nothing to the restaurant beyond early cash, like my father's inheritance was loose change I'd tossed his way. He said I was too attached to the idea that it's hers, like ownership was a childish delusion I hadn't grown out of. He asked the lawyer how to minimize her claim in a divorce. Divorce. The word buzzed in my ears, loud and electric. I hadn't even known we were discussing it. My stomach twisted as I read on. Margaret replied in the thread, her tone brisk and confident, like she was planning a dinner party instead of dismantling my life. She wrote that they needed to fix the operating agreement before Jason filed, that they should convince her to sign a cleanup document that would reflect reality and reduce my stake to something symbolic. Symbolic. She added a joke at the end, like a wink through email. She'll sign anything if you tell her it's for refinancing. I swallowed hard, the taste of bile rising in my throat. I could hear Margaret's voice in my head, light and amused, like this was all clever strategy, like I was a problem to be managed. The next page made my hands go cold. A separate email chain with a real estate agent. They were discussing refinancing the house with Jason alone on the new loan, using the restaurant as proof of income. There were bullet points about protecting the family assets from her. My name wasn't even written anymore, just her. I flipped the page, my fingers clumsy now, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might push out through my ribs. The lawyer responded, measured and careful. He warned them that any changes would need to be done carefully. He pointed out that, as things stood, I could technically remove Jason as managing member because of my majority stake. Majority stake. Seeing it there, in black and white, made me dizzy. The room felt too small, the air too thin. I had to sit down in the chair, my knees suddenly weak. Then I saw the last set of pages. Newer emails, different tone. Jason to Tessa. "Babe," he wrote, "once this is cleaned up, it'll be ours. Our kitchen, our future." My vision blurred. I stared at her name, at the casual intimacy of his words, at the way he talked about replacing me like I was an old appliance he was finally allowed to throw out. For a second, I thought I might actually throw up right there on the office floor. My mouth filled with saliva, my breath coming too fast. I pressed my lips together and forced myself to inhale slowly through my nose. Counting like I used to during panic attacks I pretended I didn't have. 1, 2, 3. Nina hovered near the door, pale. "Olivia," she whispered. "I'm okay," I lied. My hands moved on instinct, survival mode. I slid the most damning pages, the ones with the subject line, the lawyer's warning, the messages to Tessa, into my own folder. The paper made a soft, traitorous sound as it shifted. With the rest, I pulled out my phone and took photos, one after another, careful to catch dates, names, email addresses. My fingers steadied as I worked, like my body had decided this was a task it could handle. I handed the remaining stack back to Nina. "Thank you," I said quietly. She nodded, eyes shining, and left without another word. That night, I lay in bed beside Jason while he snored softly, one arm flung over the blankets like he owned everything beneath them. The room smelled like his cologne and clean sheets. Streetlight leaked through the blinds, striping the ceiling. I held my phone under the covers and scrolled through his words again and again. About me. About how easy it would be to erase me. About a future he was already planning without me in it. The shock faded, replaced by something colder and sharper. If he was willing to erase me on paper, I was done letting him erase me in my own head. When I finally confronted Jason, I did it with the softest version of the truth I could manage. Like maybe if I wrapped it gently enough, he wouldn't crush it. We were in the kitchen that weekend, late morning light spilling across the counters in pale rectangles. Ethan was in the living room, cross-legged on the rug, cartoons blaring too loud, the cheerful theme song clashing with the tight feeling in my chest. I stood at the sink, rinsing a mug, buying myself time, the water hot against my hands. "Hey," I said casually, not turning around. "I was thinking, maybe we should update the operating agreement, just make sure everything's current." I watched his reflection in the microwave door instead of his face. For half a second, his body went rigid. It was subtle, but I saw it. The way his shoulders locked, the way his jaw tightened before he could stop it. Then he laughed. Too loud, too sudden. "You and your paperwork obsession," he said, shaking his head like I was adorable and exhausting at the same time. "Why are you always looking for problems?" "I'm not," I said evenly. "It's just normal upkeep." He opened the fridge harder than necessary. "Most people would be grateful," he said, voice sharp now, "instead of trying to invent issues. We have it so good, Liv, and you're always poking at it." The mug clinked softly as I set it down. My heart was beating fast, but my voice stayed calm. "I saw an email," I said, with the subject line, "Exit Strategy." He didn't even turn around. "Oh my God," he scoffed, grabbing a beer. "You must have misread something client-related." Client-related? Like my name just happened to be in it by accident. He twisted the cap off and took a long drink, back still to me, shoulders relaxed now that he'd dismissed it. The conversation was over in his mind. He didn't ask what I saw. He didn't ask how it made me feel. He didn't look me in the eyes. "If you want out," I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop them, "just say it." He spun around then, irritation flashing across his face. "Don't be dramatic. I'm not being—" "You'd never survive without this place," he cut in, his tone flat and certain. "And you know it." The words landed clean and precise, meant to hurt, meant to shrink me. I felt them hit somewhere deep, somewhere old. For a second, my body did what it always used to do. My chest tightened, my eyes burned. I almost begged him to explain, to reassure me, to choose me. Instead, something else happened. I wiped my hand slowly on the dish towel, smoothing the fabric like I was erasing fingerprints. I looked up at him and said one word. "Okay." Not loud, not sarcastic, just, "Okay." He blinked, thrown off. "Okay," he repeated like he didn't recognize the version of me standing there. I didn't answer. I walked past him, down the hallway and closed the door to my tiny home office. The click of the latch sounded final in a way I hadn't planned but welcomed. Inside, the room felt quiet and steady. My desk lamp cast a soft circle of light over the papers I'd already started gathering. I sat down, opened my laptop, and attached every photo, every email, every screenshot. I typed the subject line slowly. "I'm ready." Then I hit send. That night, Jason paced the living room on the phone, his voice low but sharp. "She's in one of her moods," he told his mother, like I was a storm that would pass if ignored. "Yeah, I know. No, it's nothing." I sat at the kitchen table with my own phone, signing a retainer agreement with Caroline. My finger hovered for a moment over the signature line, then pressed down. The document finalized with a quiet digital chime. After that, I opened a notebook and started a list. Accounts, passwords, places my name still had access, places it needed to. I moved my small freelance income first, quietly, methodically, the way I'd always handled numbers best. Calm, precise, unemotional. Jason laughed on the phone. I wrote in silence. Today I know that was the day I stopped begging to be believed and started preparing to be proven right. Sitting across from Paul and hearing him say, "Olivia, as far as the state is concerned, you are the majority owner," felt like the floor shifting under a house I'd lived in for years without ever seeing the foundation. Caroline had arranged the meeting at Paul's office, a low beige building that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. The air conditioner hummed steadily, too loud for such a small room, and the fluorescent lights flattened everything, faces, colors, emotions, into something dull and exposed. A projector glowed on the wall, spreadsheets already pulled up, rows of numbers waiting patiently. Jason thought it was a routine year-end review. He didn't bother coming. Instead, he told his mother to go. Then she forgot the appointment entirely. Caroline had warned me not to react to that. "Just show up," she said. So I did. Paul looked startled when he saw me walk in, like he hadn't expected me to exist in this part of the story. He stood quickly, knocking his chair into the table, then glanced toward the door as if Jason might still burst in at any second. "Hey, Olivia," he said, forcing a smile. "Didn't realize you were—" "I'm here," I said, sitting down, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. Caroline didn't waste time. She slid a copy of the LLC documents across the table, the paper whispering softly against the laminate. "Paul," she said calmly, "can you confirm the ownership percentages as filed with the state?" Paul swallowed. His eyes flicked to me, then back to the papers. He cleared his throat. "Well," he said slowly, "as filed, Olivia, via OR Holdings, has 51%. Jason and his parents share the remaining 49. He looked genuinely surprised when I didn't nod along like this was old news. "You knew that, right?" My chest felt tight, but my voice came out steady. I wanted to hear it clearly. Paul nodded, uncomfortable now. He clicked his mouse, pulling up the state's online records. The screen filled with official-looking tables and dates. "There haven't been any amendments filed," he added quickly. "Nothing's changed on paper." So the sticky note, the secret meeting, the whispers, all plans, no execution. Caroline leaned slightly toward me. "What this means," she said gently, "is that you have controlling interest. You can call meetings. You can hire or fire the manager. You can change who has signing authority on the business bank accounts." I stared at the spreadsheet, the numbers blurring for a second. "Even if Jason doesn't agree?" "Even if he screams," she replied. "He cannot override the filed structure without your signature." Something loosened in my chest. Not relief exactly. More like alignment, reality snapping back into place. Paul shifted in his chair, then hesitated. "There's something else," he said, voice lower now. Caroline looked at him. "Go on." Paul clicked through another file, the screen changing again. "Jason's been drawing owner distributions," he said, "but not proportionally." I leaned forward. "What does that mean?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "He's been labeling them as manager draws. They're larger than what his ownership share would justify, regular, monthly, sometimes more." "How much?" I asked. Paul named a number, then another. My stomach dropped with each one. Money I'd never seen, money that had quietly left accounts I thought I understood. "And I wasn't informed," I said. Paul shook his head. "No, they weren't discussed with you." The room felt very quiet suddenly, like the AC had shut off. I thought about Jason telling me I was bad with money, about passwords changed for my own good, about how confidently he'd told me I'd never survive without the restaurant. He'd been surviving just fine on my silence. Caroline gathered the documents, stacking them neatly. "Thank you, Paul," she said. Her tone was polite but final. I stood on legs that felt steadier than they had in weeks. As I walked out into the parking lot, the sun felt too bright, reflecting off windshields and office windows. I paused for a moment, breathing in warm asphalt and car exhaust, letting it sink in. Jason thought his plan worked because I wouldn't ask questions, because I'd stay quiet, because I'd believe his version of who I was. I left that office less like a victim and more like the quiet majority shareholder of a life I had funded. Jason thought he was the only one holding cards. He didn't realize I'd just seen the whole deck. When Margaret called and said, "We want a nice family dinner Sunday so Jason can talk about the future," my stomach didn't flutter with nerves. It went cold. It was Thursday night, and the house was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge and the soft whir of the ceiling fan. I had my phone on speaker while wiping down the counter, the lemon cleaner sharp in the air. Margaret's voice came through syrupy sweet, stretched thin with false warmth. "Just family," she said. "After closing, we need to talk about where things are going." I glanced at Jason. He was leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, that familiar tight smile on his face, the one that never reached his eyes. Before I could respond, he chimed in, voice smooth and rehearsed. "Yeah," he said, nodding like this was reasonable. "It's time we all got on the same page." His eyes flicked to me, steady and knowing, like he already had his lines memorized and was waiting for his cue. Ethan perked up from the couch. "At the restaurant?" he asked, excited. "When it's closed and quiet?" Jason's smile softened just enough for our son. "That's right, buddy." I swallowed and forced my own smile. In my head, I translated the invitation into something more honest. "We're staging your humiliation. Sit still and take it." "Sunday works," I said, my voice even. After the call ended, Jason surprised me by moving closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. His touch felt careful, measured. "You look tired," he said. "Why don't you take it easy until Sunday?" Take it easy. The word slid over me like a sedative, not concern, but control. "I'm fine," I replied. That night, while Jason watched TV in the living room, laughing at something too loud, I sat at my desk with my laptop open. The glow of the screen lit the stacks of invoices beside me, the neat columns of numbers grounding me in a way people never had. I coded invoices automatically, fingers moving fast while reading Caroline's latest email. Divorce petition drafted, valuation documents ready, motion to freeze certain business accounts on standby. All she needed was my signal, a date. My heart beat steadily as I typed back. We decided quickly, cleanly. I would sign and file the petition Friday. The process server would come Monday morning, right to the house, no warning. And Sunday night's family dinner would stay on the calendar. Jason wanted a stage. He just wasn't going to be the only one with a microphone. I printed what needed printing, signed where Caroline had marked with digital tabs, and slid the papers into a plain folder. No drama, no ceremony, just preparation. Before shutting down my laptop, I opened my messages and texted Nina, "Hey, can you be working the floor cleanup late Sunday? And keep your phone handy." The reply came almost immediately. A thumbs up emoji, then a heart. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the house settle. The tick of cooling pipes, the distant sound of Jason's voice from the TV, Ethan's soft breathing down the hall. Everything looked the same. That was the strange part. Life didn't rearrange itself just because I finally had a plan. Jason came into the office doorway, pausing when he saw me still working. "You should really rest," he said lightly. "Big family talk coming up." I met his eyes and smiled. "I will." He nodded, satisfied, and walked away. I shut the laptop and sat in the quiet, my hands resting on the folder in my lap. Today I understand that moment wasn't about courage or revenge. It was about timing. I wasn't walking into that dinner blind anymore. I was walking in prepared. Jason slammed his fist on the table so hard the china rattled, and for a split second the sound filled the entire dining room. "I'm filing for divorce," he shouted. It was Sunday night. The restaurant was closed, the front doors locked, the lights dimmed to that soft after-hours glow that usually felt peaceful. The dining room smelled like roast chicken and lemon polish, clean and warm. Margaret had insisted on using her own china, heavy white plates with gold trim, laid out at table 12 like it was a ceremonial altar. Cloth napkins folded just so, her idea of dignity. Ethan sat at the far end with a coloring book and a cup of crayons, legs swinging under the table, humming quietly to himself. He looked up when Jason raised his voice, startled. Margaret clutched her pearls, literally, and sucked in a breath like she'd been waiting for her cue. It had started the way she wanted, a speech about family legacy, about sacrifices, about hard decisions that have to be made for the good of everyone. Jason's leg bounced under the table the entire time, telegraphing his impatience. He'd been itching for this moment. When he stood and clinked his glass with a fork, the sound rang sharp and theatrical. He shook a manila envelope like a prop. "It's for the best," he said, projecting confidence. "Olivia isn't happy here. We'll be handling the business side separately." He paused. He was waiting for tears, for begging, for me to fall apart so he could look reasonable by comparison. Instead, I reached for my water. My hand didn't shake. I took a slow sip, feeling the cool glass against my lips, then set it down carefully. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the refrigeration units in the back. "That's going to be difficult," I said evenly, considering my divorce petition was filed on Friday. Jason's smile faltered. "You were served this morning," I added. "Check your briefcase." He froze. Then he sat down hard, fumbling with the latch, papers spilling onto the table. His face drained of color as he read the top page. Margaret shot to her feet. "What nonsense is this?" she demanded, voice shrill. "Jason, what is she talking about?" I opened my own folder. The sound of paper sliding onto the table felt loud, deliberate. I laid out the LLC documents first, the ones showing ownership percentages, then the bank statements highlighting Jason's excessive distributions, then the printed emails, the subject line exit strategy, bold at the top. Nina hovered quietly in the doorway, pretending to wipe down menus, her presence steady and intentional. "As majority owner of Reed & Comer's Bistro," I said, my voice calm enough to surprise even me, "I'm removing Jason as managing member effective immediately." I slid a single page across the table, a formal resolution, already signed, already notarized. Caroline's business card was stapled neatly to the corner. Margaret gasped, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "This can't be legal," she sputtered. "This is our family restaurant." I pointed to a highlighted line on the documents. "My inheritance funded the entire opening capital," I said. "Yes, our family, including me." Jason flipped through the emails with shaking hands, his own words staring back at him, calling me dead weight, planning to replace me with Tessa, plotting how to minimize my claim. His mouth opened, then closed, like he couldn't find a sentence that worked anymore. Margaret's eyes rolled back. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then she slumped sideways in her chair with a soft, heavy thud. Frank jumped up, catching her awkwardly as her pearls spilled onto the floor. Nina rushed in with water, her voice calm as she called Margaret's name. Ethan stared, wide-eyed and silent. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my voice stayed steady. "We'll handle the rest through lawyers," I said to Jason. "Fair settlement. Structured visitation for Ethan." Then I turned slightly and looked at Nina. "Tomorrow," I said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear, "please tell the staff there's been a change in management. We'll be okay." Jason looked up at me then. For the first time all night, maybe for the first time ever, he looked genuinely afraid, not angry, not smug, afraid of losing something he never believed was mine to take. Today I understand that power doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it just clears its throat and reads from the paperwork. Within a week, I was apparently a gold digger who'd stolen my own restaurant. That was the version of the story Jason started telling once he realized shouting hadn't worked. Funny, considering the only gold I'd ever touched had gone straight into his kitchen, into ovens, permits, payroll, and the first month's rent that kept the doors open long enough for him to call himself a success. The stories spread fast, faster than truth ever does. Jason told mutual friends that I'd tricked him into signing papers he didn't understand. He said the ownership shift was recent and shady, like I'd slipped something under his nose while he was distracted. He never mentioned the date stamp on the original filing, never mentioned the years my name had been there in plain black ink. Margaret took a more emotional route. She called relatives sobbing, telling them I'd blindsided her and stolen her son's future. She painted herself as a mother protecting her child from a calculating wife. She skipped over the emails where she'd suggested reducing my stake to something symbolic, like I was a decorative ribbon on a box they planned to keep. At the restaurant, the air changed. A few staff members stopped meeting my eyes. Conversations went quiet when I walked into the room. One server, young, nervous, and very clearly fed lines by someone else, muttered under his breath that I owed Jason at least half the place because everyone knows he's the real talent. I smiled thinly and kept walking, my heels clicking against the tile louder than usual. I didn't correct him. Not then. I didn't rant online. I didn't post screenshots or write late-night essays I'd regret in the morning. Instead, I called a staff meeting. We gathered in the dining room before service, the smell of coffee and sanitizer mixing in the air. Nina stood beside me, steady as ever. Paul joined us with his laptop, spreadsheets already pulled up. The lights were too bright, the chairs arranged in a rough semicircle like a classroom. I spoke calmly. I explained the ownership structure in plain language. I answered questions without defensiveness. I stated the facts. Jason was no longer managing member. He remained a minority owner for now. Operations would continue without disruption. I showed them a letter from the bank confirming the business accounts were stable. Paychecks would come on time. Vendors were paid. Nothing was about to collapse. Then, almost casually, I mentioned that anyone who chose to stay would be part of a profit-sharing plan going forward. Not a threat, an invitation. I watched the room shift, shoulders lowered. People exchanged glances. Fear loosened its grip. Afterward, Nina squeezed my arm once, quick and quiet. "You did good," she said. Jason's lawyer responded the way Jason always did, loud and aggressive. A letter arrived challenging my unilateral actions, full of bolded phrases and moral outrage. Caroline answered with a thick packet of documents, dates, signatures, filings, and an offer. We buy out Jason's shares at fair market value, or we let a judge review everything, including dissipation, including adultery. The tone changed after that. Through a friend, I heard whispers in the chef community, people talking about Jason getting kicked out of his own place, about him being caught cheating with staff. The rumors weren't flattering and they weren't kind. Jason doubled down. Every new version of his story painted him as more wronged, more betrayed. But something kept happening that he couldn't control. Every time he spoke, someone asked a simple question. "Is that what the paperwork says?" And every time, the answer was no. Today, I understand that lies don't collapse all at once. They thin, they fray, they start needing too much explanation. And once people stop nodding along, once they start asking for receipts, the storyteller loses his audience. In court, Jason tried to charm the judge the way he used to charm food critics, leaning forward, smiling at the right moments, speaking like if he sold the story well enough, the ending would change. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and old paper, the kind of place where time felt flattened. The fluorescent lights were unforgiving, buzzing softly overhead. Jason sat at the defendant's table in a perfectly tailored suit, hair neatly styled, posture confident. Margaret sat behind him, pale and tight-lipped, looking personally wounded by the entire process. I sat beside Carolyn. Our folders were stacked neatly in front of us, color-coded tabs visible like quiet armor. I kept my hands folded, nails pressed lightly into my palm, grounding myself in the chair's hard plastic. Jason testified first. He spoke smoothly, pacing his words, painting himself as the exhausted chef husband who had poured everything into the restaurant while being abandoned at home. He described me as ungrateful, as someone who thinks she owns everything because of daddy's money. He leaned hard into the phrase, letting it hang in the air like an accusation. He talked about his sweat equity, about late nights, burned hands, missed holidays. He waved his hands as he spoke, animated, passionate, like he was explaining a tasting menu instead of dismantling a marriage. A few times, he glanced at the judge to see if she was nodding. She wasn't. Caroline stood for cross-examination, calm and unhurried. Her voice never rose. She didn't need it to. She introduced the original LLC filing first, projecting it onto the screen. My name, my holding company. 51% ownership, the date clearly visible. Then the bank statements, large transfers from my inheritance account into the restaurant's startup costs, checks, wire confirmations, no ambiguity. Jason shifted in his seat. Caroline moved on to tax returns, highlighting the manager draws Jason had taken, amounts far exceeding his ownership share. She let the numbers speak, pausing just long enough after each one for them to sink in. Jason's story started to wobble. His answers grew shorter, less confident. When Caroline introduced the exit strategy emails, Jason's jaw tightened. He claimed he'd been venting, that he never really intended to cut me out, that it was just stress, words typed in frustration. The judge didn't react. She simply wrote faster, pen moving steadily across the page. On custody, Jason tried a different angle. He called himself the fun parent. He implied I was rigid, overly focused on work, not present enough. He smiled as he said it, like this was supposed to land gently. Caroline responded with documents, school records showing me listed as Ethan's primary contact, emails with teachers, calendar logs, a statement from Ethan's teacher describing who attended conferences, who handled pickups, who noticed changes in mood. Jason stopped smiling. When it was over, the judge leaned back slightly, hands folded. Her voice was even, controlled. She ordered a buyout of Jason's shares at fair market value to be paid over time. She granted me primary physical custody with generous but structured visitation for Jason. She noted Jason's poor judgment in mixing personal and professional decisions and warned that future misconduct could affect custody arrangements. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Jason stared straight ahead, blinking hard. In the hallway afterward, the air felt cooler, sharper. Jason brushed past me, leaning in just enough for his words to cut. "I'll open a better restaurant across town," he hissed. "I'll crush you." I didn't stop walking. "Do it on your own dime this time," I said over my shoulder. "Today I know that charm only works when there's nothing solid underneath. Paperwork doesn't care how convincing you sound." The first time I walked into Reed & Cussors after the buyout finalized, the sign above the door looked different. Not because it had changed. The lettering was the same. The paint was the same. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I believed my own name was behind it. The door chimed softly as I stepped in, the familiar sound grounding instead of tightening my chest. Morning light spilled across the tables, catching on clean glassware in the polished bar. The place smelled like fresh bread and citrus cleaner. Calm, orderly, mine. With Jason legally disengaged from management and his shares on a buyout plan, I stopped reacting and started stabilizing. Nina and I sat with the chef one afternoon, menus spread across a table, talking about what worked and what didn't. No ego. No dramatic declarations, just food, margins, flow. We trimmed dishes that cost more than they earned and brought back a few quiet favorites customers always asked for. I renegotiated vendor contracts, reading every line this time. Some vendors tried to talk over me at first, using the tone they'd reserved for Jason, confident, dismissive. I didn't rush them. I waited. Numbers have patience. When I spoke, they listened. Payroll transparency came next, Clear schedules, clear policies, no whispers about favoritism. Paychecks arrived on time, every time. The kitchen felt different almost immediately, quieter, focused. People stopped bracing for mood swings that never came. Without Jason hovering and without his open favoritism toward Tessa, the tension drained out of the room. Tessa quit quietly a few weeks later and moved to another city. The rumor was Jason had tried to bring her into his new venture, and she backed out the moment courts and lawyers entered the picture. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. I met with Paul monthly now, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I wanted to understand it all. Every line, every percentage. Sitting in his office, I asked questions without apologizing for them. The numbers made sense when no one was trying to make me doubt myself. I also built a small advisory circle. Caroline for legal, Paul for finances, Nina for operations. Once a month, we met in the back office, the whiteboard filled with goals and timelines. No one interrupted me. No one minimized my input. No one said I just helped with the numbers. At home, Ethan adjusted to the new rhythm faster than I expected. Weekdays mostly with me, some weekends with his dad. He started sleeping through the night again. One afternoon, he came home from school grinning and announced that he'd told his classmates, "My mom owns a restaurant." The pride in his voice caught me off guard. He'd never said anything like that when Jason was the boss. One night, after closing, I locked the front door myself. The restaurant was quiet, chairs stacked, lights dimmed to a soft glow. I rested my forehead briefly against the glass, then ran my fingers over it. Smudges bloomed under the light. Mine, the staff's, my son's fingerprints from when he pressed his hands there, waiting for me to finish up. The place had always been built with my father's money and my labor. The difference now was that I was done pretending it wasn't. Today I know ownership isn't just about paperwork or titles. It's about presence. It's about not shrinking when you walk through your own door. Jason opened his new place 6 months later. By the end of the year, it was gone. It wasn't my doing. I didn't call anyone. I didn't warn vendors or whisper to staff. It was his math finally catching up to him. He found a smaller spot across town, a narrow corner location with exposed brick and bad lighting, and announced it like a rebirth. His social media filled with glossy photos and captions about fresh starts and authentic passion. He framed his departure from Reed & Co. as creative differences, like he'd walked away from something that couldn't contain him. For a while, people were curious. Friends sent me screenshots, waiting for a reaction. I didn't give one. Curiosity alone can keep a place alive for a few weeks. Without my spreadsheets, without Paul's cautious reminders, without Caroline's quiet habit of asking, "And then what?" his weak points showed fast. He overspent on decor, custom tiles, imported fixtures, before stabilizing cash flow. He underestimated payroll taxes. He paid invoices late, then later. Vendors started talking, the way they always do. Slow to pay, hard to reach, promises without follow-through. Staff didn't last. Turnover became a rhythm. New faces every few weeks, then empty shifts, then handwritten help, wanted signs taped crookedly to the window. Tessa quit again after a blow-up over scheduling. I heard about it through someone else, the story traveling faster than it should have. A sous chef posted a vague but unmistakable thread online about a narcissistic owner chef who screams at everyone then plays victim. No names, no tags. It didn't need them. People in the industry connected the dots quietly, efficiently. Meanwhile, Reed & Co. kept doing what it had learned to do, plug along. We weren't viral, no flashy reels, no breathless write-ups, but we paid on time. We treated people decently. The kitchen stayed steady. The dining room stayed full enough. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a reputation formed, not for brilliance, but for reliability, for being a good place to work. Some of Jason's new hires applied to us quietly. Resumes slid into my inbox with careful cover letters. We didn't take everyone, but we listened. One afternoon, Paul mentioned it casually, like an aside. "I saw a public notice," he said. "Jason's LLC has a lien, unpaid taxes." I thanked him and closed the spreadsheet we were reviewing. The numbers in front of me felt solid, grounded. A few months later, I drove past Jason's place and saw the sign, for lease. White letters on a red background taped inside the window. The chairs were still stacked inside, the lights off. The door looked smaller than I remembered. That night, Ethan mentioned his dad over dinner, pushing peas around his plate. "Dad says people didn't appreciate real talent," he said softly, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to repeat it. I swallowed the instinct to respond, to explain, to correct. "Sometimes," I said instead, keeping my voice even, "things don't work out the way people expect." He nodded, accepting that answer the way kids do when they trust there's more beneath it. At a neighborhood event that fall, I saw Jason again. He stood on the outskirts of the park near the food trucks, thinner than before, shoulders a little hunched. He was talking too loudly to a small group, gesturing with his hands, telling a story about cooking abroad like it was a concrete plan and not a drifting idea. His laugh was sharper now, pitched just a bit too high. When he saw me, he stopped mid-sentence. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the grass and folding tables. Then he looked away. And for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar mix of fear and anger tighten my chest. I didn't feel the urge to defend myself or prove anything. I felt distance. Standing there, watching from across the park, I understood something I'd been waiting years to learn. Karma wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive with applause or justice speeches. It was a slow leak in the life raft he insisted on steering without ever checking for holes. The next time we had a family dinner, it was at my house. Ethan sat at the head of the table like he'd been promoted, legs swinging, napkin tucked into his collar with exaggerated seriousness. No one yelled. No one fainted. No one announced life-changing news over the mashed potatoes. The quiet felt almost suspicious at first, like my body was waiting for the other shoe to drop. My new place was smaller than the house Jason and I had shared, but it was warm in a way that didn't need square footage to prove itself. The chairs didn't match. The table was secondhand, its surface scratched and softened from years of someone else's meals. The kitchen smelled like roasted chicken and herbs, familiar enough to remind me of the restaurant, but quieter. No clatter of plates, no edge of performance. Ethan carried plates to the table carefully, narrating his movements like a sportscaster. "Okay, forks go here," he said, lining them up with exaggerated precision. He chattered about school projects, about a volcano he was building out of papier-mâché, about how last weekend he'd helped the line cook plate desserts at Reed & Co. "She let me put the mint leaves on top," he said proudly. "Mom's restaurant is busy on Saturdays." He said it so casually, Mom's restaurant, like it had always been that way, like it was the most normal fact in the world. My sister arrived with her kids 10 minutes late, arms full of grocery bags and apologies, shoes piled by the door, jackets draped over chairs. The table filled up fast, plates clinking, conversation overlapping. We ate, laughed, argued lightly about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. The debate got loud but not sharp. No one made pointed comments about who really built what. No one used the word legacy like a weapon. Halfway through the meal, I realized my shoulders weren't creeping toward my ears. I wasn't monitoring every sentence, bracing for the tone shift that used to signal an attack disguised as humor. My fork moved from plate to mouth without hesitation. After dinner, my phone buzzed on the counter. Margaret. A dramatic text about holidays and what you did to our family. I read it once, then set the phone face down. Later, I sent a brief reply. Polite, vague, non-committal. No explanations, no defense. Frank called a few days later. His voice was quiet, careful. He said he knew how hard I'd worked, that he wanted to say thank you. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't push for forgiveness or reconciliation. It was enough. Jason's visits with Ethan settled into something almost boring, exactly how I liked it. They tossed a ball at the park, grabbed burgers. When Jason dropped Ethan off, he stayed at the door. No storming inside. No arguments carried into the kitchen. Court orders and boundaries had a way of making people concise. One evening, after everyone had left and the house had settled back into its own rhythm, I stood at the sink washing dishes. Warm water ran over my hands. Soft music played from my phone on the counter. The window above the sink reflected my own face back at me, calm in a way I barely recognized. Plate, rinse, stack. It took a moment for the realization to land. I had made it through an entire family dinner without bracing for impact, without rehearsing responses, without preparing to be minimized. My body was still learning, still uncoiling from years of tension. But standing there, listening to the quiet clink of clean dishes, I understood something simple and profound. Family dinner no longer meant trial. Sometimes I still hear it in my head. Jason's voice at that table, sharp and loud, shouting, "I'm filing for divorce," like it was a weapon he could swing to end the conversation. The difference now is that my body doesn't react the way it used to. No jolt, no clench, no instinct to shrink. It remembers what came next. It was late that night, the kind of quiet that only settles after a full day. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen soft against the darkened room. The dishwasher hummed steadily, a low mechanical breath, and every once in a while a car passed outside, tires whispering over pavement. I had next month's budget for Reed & Co. pulled up, numbers lined up neatly, predictable and honest. I scrolled, adjusted a column, saved a draft, and my mind wandered back to that dinner. Margaret's gasp, Jason's smug smile, already celebrating a victory he thought was guaranteed. The pause after his announcement, that suspended moment where everyone waited for me to cry, to argue, to plead. I remembered the feel of the cool glass under my fingers when I chose to take a sip of water instead. The weight of my folder in my lap, heavier than it looked, full of proof I'd stopped doubting. Back then, my heart had been pounding, but my hands had been steady. I hadn't realized how much that mattered. Now, sitting alone in my kitchen, I understood it clearly. The power in that moment hadn't been in firing him or in watching his mother faint. It had been in finally trusting myself, believing my own paperwork, my own numbers, my own memory. I'd stopped accepting the version of me they'd been feeding me for years. The helper, the sensitive one, the woman who should be grateful for scraps of credit. I closed one spreadsheet and opened another, checking payroll projections. Everything balanced. Everyone was covered. Ethan would grow up with 2 stories about that time in his life. His father's version, where Dad was the tragic hero undone by betrayal and bad luck. And mine, where Mom learned how to stop apologizing for existing. I couldn't control which one he'd repeat someday, but I could control how I lived now. I could make sure my story made sense in the way I showed up for him, for myself. I glanced down the hallway toward his room. His door was cracked open, a soft line of nightlight spilling into the dark. He was asleep, safe, unaware of how many quiet decisions had been made to keep it that way. Reed & Coder's wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was proof carved into wood and brick and balanced ledgers that investing in myself hadn't been selfish. It had been survival. The fact that people liked the food, that the dining room stayed full, that staff smiled when they clocked in. That was just the cherry on top. I saved the budget file and shut the laptop. The click of it closing echoed softly in the room. I stood, stretched, and turned off the kitchen light. Darkness settled gently, not threatening, just complete. As I headed down the hall, the image of Margaret hitting the floor flickered through my mind, quick and distant, like a scene from a movie I'd already watched too many times. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I felt calm. Because if someone stood up at a dinner table tomorrow and shouted a threat like that again, I knew exactly what I'd do. I'd take a breath. I'd reach for my own file, and I'd let the truth do the heavy lifting.